The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete parade grounds of Fort Harrison Military Academy as recruits lined up for their daily inspection. Among them stood Sarah Chun, a petite woman in her mid-20s who barely reached 5 feet 4 inches in her combat boots. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her uniform hung slightly loose on her small frame. To the other cadets, she looked like she had wandered into the wrong place entirely. "Look what we got here," sneered Marcus Rodriguez, a towering 6'3" cadet from Texas who had already established himself as the unofficial leader of their training squad. His voice carried across the formation, drawing snickers from the others. Did someone's little sister get lost on her way to cheerleading practice? Sarah kept her eyes forward, maintaining perfect military bearing despite the laughter rippling through the ranks. She had heard worse during her years of covert operations, where blending in and appearing harmless had often meant the difference between mission success and failure. These young men had no idea that the unassuming woman they were mocking had spent the last 8 years conducting classified missions in some of the most dangerous regions of the world. Drill Sergeant Williams, a grizzled veteran with 20 years of service, barked orders that snapped everyone to attention. "Listen up, maggots. Today begins your advanced combat training phase. Some of you think you're tough because you made it through basic. Let me tell you something. Basic training was just the warm-up. Now we separate the warriors from the wannabes." The sergeant's eyes swept over the formation, lingering momentarily on Sarah before continuing his speech. "You'll be tested in every aspect of military excellence, physical fitness, tactical awareness, weapons proficiency, and, most importantly, your ability to function as a unit. Those who can't keep up will be shipped out faster than yesterday's chow." As the formation broke up and headed toward the obstacle course, Marcus fell into step beside his buddies Jake Morrison and Tony Valdez. "Did you see the way that little China doll was shaking during inspection?" he said loud enough for Sarah to hear. "I give her about 2 days before she's crying her way home to mommy." Jake, a stocky blonde from Michigan, chuckled as he adjusted his gear. "My money says she doesn't make it through the first PT test. Look at those noodle arms. I bet she can't even do 5 push-ups." Tony, who had grown up in the rough neighborhoods of Chicago and prided himself on his street smarts, shook his head in disbelief. "I don't know what the recruiters were thinking, letting someone like that into advanced training. This isn't summer camp. People's lives depend on everyone pulling their weight." Sarah walked quietly behind them, her expression neutral as she listened to their commentary. She had perfected the art of invisibility during her SEAL operations, learning to observe and assess threats while remaining completely unremarkable. These cadets saw exactly what she wanted them to see: a small, seemingly fragile woman who didn't belong in their masculine world of military training. What they couldn't see was the intricate network of scars hidden beneath her uniform, each one telling a story of survival and victory in hostile territory. The thin line along her left shoulder blade came from shrapnel during a rescue mission in Afghanistan. The barely visible mark on her right wrist was from when she had to cut through restraints during an escape from enemy captivity in Syria. Her hands, though appearing soft and delicate, bore the calluses of countless hours training with weapons and climbing equipment. The obstacle course loomed ahead of them like a medieval torture device designed by someone with a particularly cruel imagination. Rope climbs, wall scaling, cargo net traversals, mud crawls under barbed wire, and a series of increasingly difficult balance beams stretched across nearly half a mile of unforgiving terrain. At the end waited the dreaded confidence course, a 30-foot tower that required cadets to rappel down while under simulated fire. "All right, ladies," Sergeant Williams bellowed as the group assembled at the starting line. "This course will test every muscle in your body and every ounce of determination in your soul. The standard time is 18 minutes. Anything over 20 minutes is failure. Anything under 15 minutes earns my respect, which is harder to get than a diamond-studded unicorn." Marcus cracked his knuckles and stretched his impressive frame. At 220 pounds of mostly muscle, he had been a star linebacker in high school and had easily dominated the previous fitness challenges. "Watch and learn, people," he announced to his crew. "This is how it's done." Sarah positioned herself near the back of the group, studying the course layout with tactical precision. Her trained eye immediately identified the most efficient routes, potential hazards, and optimal technique for each obstacle. During her SEAL training, she had completed courses far more challenging than this one, often while carrying a full combat load and under actual enemy fire. The whistle blew, and the cadets surged forward like racehorses leaving the gate. Marcus shot ahead immediately, his long legs eating up the ground as he approached the first obstacle, a series of hurdles that required both speed and agility. Behind him, Jake and Tony kept pace, while the rest of the formation spread out according to their individual fitness levels. Sarah maintained a steady, controlled pace that kept her in the middle of the pack. She had learned long ago that drawing attention to superior abilities too early could compromise operational security. Better to blend in, assess the competition, and reveal capabilities only when absolutely necessary. The first real test came at the rope climb, a 30-foot vertical challenge that separated the athletic from the merely ambitious. Marcus attacked it with brute force, using his upper body strength to power his way up the rope in impressive time. His technique was inefficient but effective for someone of his size and strength. When Sarah's turn came, she approached the rope with deceptive casualness. Where Marcus had relied on arm strength alone, she employed a technique that engaged her core and legs, allowing her to ascend with fluid efficiency. The other cadets barely noticed as she completed the climb in less time than the much larger man had managed, her movements so smooth they appeared effortless. "Not bad for a lightweight," Jake commented, though his tone suggested surprise rather than genuine admiration. "Maybe she's got some hidden talent after all." Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead as he watched Sarah descend the rope with controlled precision. "Lucky climb," he muttered. "Let's see how she handles the real challenges." The cargo net traverse proved more revealing. This obstacle required cadets to crawl across a series of interconnected nets suspended 15 feet above a mud pit. Upper body strength was crucial, but technique and balance were equally important. Many of the larger cadets struggled with the awkward positioning, their weight working against them as they fought to maintain momentum. Sarah approached the net with the patience of someone who had navigated far more treacherous terrain. During one memorable mission in the mountains of Pakistan, she had spent 3 hours traversing a damaged bridge using nothing but steel cables and her climbing gear, all while enemy forces searched for her team below. Compared to that experience, the cargo net felt like a playground challenge. She moved across the obstacle with spider-like grace, distributing her weight perfectly and maintaining steady progress while larger cadets struggled and fell into the mud below. Her small frame, which the others saw as a disadvantage, actually worked in her favor as she required less grip strength to support herself. "How is she doing that?" Tony asked, genuine puzzlement in his voice as he watched Sarah navigate the net without apparent effort. "She's making it look easy." Marcus's jaw tightened as he realized the small woman was outperforming him on yet another obstacle. "It's just technique," he said dismissively. "Anyone can crawl across a net. Wait until we get to something that requires real strength." His chance for vindication came at the wall climb, a 12-foot wooden barrier that typically required cadets to boost each other over or use pure upper body strength to muscle their way to the top. Marcus had been looking forward to this obstacle, confident that his height and reach would give him an insurmountable advantage. He attacked the wall like a force of nature, jumping high and grabbing the top edge before pulling himself up and over with impressive power. His time was excellent, and he dropped to the other side with a satisfied grin, certain that he had just demonstrated his superiority. Sarah studied the wall for a moment, analyzing angles and approach vectors. During her SEAL training, she had learned that obstacles were just puzzles waiting to be solved. Size and strength could be advantages, but intelligence and technique could often overcome both. She took a running start and hit the wall with precise timing, using her momentum to carry her higher than should have been possible for someone of her stature. At the peak of her jump, she executed a technique she had learned from parkour experts during urban warfare training, catching the edge with one hand while using her feet to find purchase on the wall's surface. In one fluid motion, she swung herself up and over the barrier, landing softly on the other side. Her time was not only faster than Marcus's, but she had made it look effortless in the process. A hush fell over the nearby cadets as they realized what they had just witnessed. This wasn't luck or beginner's fortune. This was skill at a level that suggested serious training and experience far beyond what a typical new recruit should possess. "What the hell was that?" Marcus demanded, his face flushed with exertion and growing anger. "Nobody moves like that without serious training. Where did you learn to do that stuff?" Sarah looked at him with innocent eyes, her expression betraying nothing of the years of intensive training that had gone into developing her capabilities. "I took some gymnastics classes when I was younger," she said with a slight shrug. "Guess some of it stuck." The explanation was technically true. She had indeed taken gymnastics as a child, though she failed to mention the 8 years of advanced military training that had followed. Her ability to tell partial truths while maintaining operational security had been honed through countless interrogations and cover stories. Jake stared at her with new respect tinged with suspicion. Gymnastics doesn't teach you to move like that. I've seen Olympic gymnasts, and they don't have that kind of tactical awareness. Maybe you should spend less time watching and more time training, Sarah replied mildly as she adjusted her gear for the next obstacle. Her tone was friendly but carried just enough edge to suggest that she wasn't intimidated by their questioning. The mud crawl proved to be the great equalizer that many cadets had been dreading. This obstacle required them to low crawl under barbed wire for 50 yards through thick, sticky mud, while instructors fired blank ammunition over their heads to simulate combat conditions. Size became a liability as larger bodies struggled to stay low enough to avoid the wire. Marcus approached the crawl with growing frustration. His earlier confidence had been shaken by Sarah's performance, and the confined space of the obstacle didn't favor his physical advantages. He dropped prone and began pulling himself forward with his elbows, immediately struggling with the awkward positioning required to stay below the wire. Sarah slipped into the mud behind him and instantly transformed. The careful mask of inexperience fell away as muscle memory from countless real combat situations took over. She moved through the obstacle like liquid mercury, staying impossibly low while maintaining steady forward progress. This was terrain she knew intimately. During one mission in Iraq, she had spent 6 hours crawling through a drainage system to reach her target, all while enemy forces patrolled overhead. The simulated gunfire that made other cadets flinch and hesitate didn't even register to her trained senses. She recognized the sound signature of blank ammunition and dismissed it as irrelevant to her current objectives. Real bullets had a different acoustical profile, and she had learned to distinguish between threats that required evasive action and sounds that could be ignored. As she overtook Marcus in the mud, she heard him cursing under his breath as he struggled to maintain the low profile required by the obstacle. His size, which had been an advantage in other challenges, now worked against him as he fought to squeeze his broad shoulders under the wire. "This is impossible," he muttered, not realizing how clearly his voice carried in the confined space. "Nobody can move that fast through this stuff." Sarah said nothing as she glided past him, her movement so efficient that she barely disturbed the mud around her. The other cadets behind them watched in amazement as the small woman who they had dismissed as weak outperformed the strongest member of their unit on one of the most grueling obstacles. Emerging from the mud crawl, Sarah was dirty but not winded. She had completed the obstacle in record time while barely elevating her heart rate. Around her, other cadets gasped for breath and struggled to orient themselves after the disorienting experience of crawling in the mud under simulated fire. Marcus hauled himself out of the muck several minutes behind her, his uniform caked with mud, and his breathing labored. The easy confidence that had characterized his earlier performance was completely gone, replaced by something that looked dangerously close to panic as he realized he was being systematically outperformed by someone he had written off as inferior. "This isn't over," he said quietly as he passed Sarah on the way to the next obstacle. There was no humor in his voice now, only the cold anger of someone whose worldview was being challenged in ways he didn't understand. The final obstacle was the confidence course, a 30-foot rappelling tower that simulated fast roping from a helicopter under combat conditions. Instructors would fire additional blank rounds while cadets descended, testing their ability to maintain control under stress. Marcus climbed the tower first, determined to reassert his dominance on an obstacle that seemed perfectly suited to his size and strength. At the top, he clipped into the rappelling gear and checked his equipment with the thoroughness of someone who knew this might be his last chance to prove his superiority. The descent started well. Marcus pushed off the tower with authority and began a controlled rappel that demonstrated solid technique and impressive confidence. But as the blank fire erupted around him, his concentration wavered. The stress of the morning's unexpected competition had taken its toll, and his timing became erratic. Halfway down the tower, he made the mistake of looking toward the firing positions instead of focusing on his descent. The momentary distraction caused him to lose control of his brake hand, and he suddenly found himself dropping much faster than intended. Training and instinct took over, and Marcus managed to regain control before hitting the ground, but his landing was far from graceful. He stumbled and nearly fell, his face burning with embarrassment as he realized the entire formation had witnessed his near disaster. Sarah climbed the tower with the same unhurried confidence she had displayed all morning. At the top, she checked her gear with the automatic precision of someone who had performed this exact task hundreds of times under far more dangerous conditions. During her SEAL operations, fast roping had been a regular insertion method, and she had descended from helicopters while taking actual enemy fire. As she clipped into the rappelling system, her mind briefly flashed back to a mission over Somalia where her helicopter had taken heavy damage during insertion. She had been forced to rappel from a crippled aircraft while rocket-propelled grenades exploded around the landing zone, making this training exercise feel almost relaxingly peaceful by comparison. The blank fire began as she pushed off from the tower, but the sound registered only as background noise to her focused concentration. She descended in perfect control, her speed carefully modulated for maximum efficiency while maintaining complete safety margins. At the bottom, she landed with the soft precision of a cat, immediately disconnecting from the rappelling gear and moving clear of the landing zone in one fluid motion. The entire descent had taken less than 30 seconds, executed with a level of professionalism that left no doubt about her extensive training and experience. Sergeant Williams, who had been observing the exercise from the base of the tower, approached Sarah with an expression of poorly concealed curiosity. In 20 years of training recruits, he had rarely seen anyone demonstrate such consistent excellence across such a diverse range of challenges. "Outstanding work, Chun," he said, his voice carefully neutral despite his obvious interest in her background. "That was textbook rappelling technique. Where did you train before coming here?" Sarah met his gaze steadily, her expression revealing nothing of the classified operations that had shaped her skills. "Various places, Sergeant," she replied. "I've always been interested in physical fitness and outdoor activities." It was another carefully crafted partial truth. She had indeed trained in various places, from the mountains of Colorado to the jungles of Central America, in facilities and environments that didn't appear on any public maps. Her interest in outdoor activities had involved survival training in some of the most hostile environments on Earth. The sergeant nodded slowly, clearly not entirely satisfied with her vague response, but recognizing that some questions weren't meant to be answered in a public setting. "Well, keep up the excellent work. You've set quite an example for your fellow cadets today." As the formation reassembled for the march back to barracks, the dynamic within the group had shifted dramatically. The easy camaraderie that had characterized the morning's earlier harassment had been replaced by confused silence and growing resentment from Marcus and his supporters. "There's something not right about her," Marcus muttered to Jake as they walked back across the parade ground. His earlier swagger had been replaced by the sullen anger of someone whose assumptions about the world had been violently challenged. Jake nodded grimly, his own confidence shaken by the morning's events. "Nobody gets that good at this stuff without serious training. The question is, what kind of training, and why isn't she talking about it?" Behind them, Sarah walked in comfortable silence, internally processing the morning's events and their implications for her mission. She had revealed more of her capabilities than originally planned, but the harassment from Marcus and his group had required a measured response to establish her position within the unit hierarchy. Her cover story as a new recruit seeking advanced military training was still intact, but she would need to be more careful about concealing her true skill level. The mission that had brought her to Fort Harrison was far too important to be compromised by the wounded pride of a few cadets who couldn't accept being outperformed by someone they considered inferior. As they approached the barracks, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in one of the building's windows. Covered in mud from the obstacle course, but clearly unbothered by the morning's physical challenges, she looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, a determined young woman who was perhaps more capable than her appearance suggested, but nothing that couldn't be explained by natural talent and hard work. The real test, she knew, would come in the days ahead as Marcus and his group processed their humiliation and decided how to respond. She had dealt with hostile environments before, but this particular challenge required a delicate balance between maintaining her cover and protecting herself from escalating harassment. The afternoon would bring weapons training, and Sarah found herself looking forward to the challenge of concealing skills that had been honed in actual combat situations. Her marksmanship abilities were the result of years of training with the world's best instructors and real-world application in situations where missing the target meant mission failure and potentially death. As she entered the barracks and began cleaning her gear, Sarah reflected on the irony of her situation. These young cadets saw her as an outsider who didn't belong in their world, never suspecting that she had already proven herself in ways they couldn't imagine. The morning's obstacle course had been child's play compared to the challenges she had faced during her covert operations. But maintaining her cover required her to continue playing the role of a capable but inexperienced recruit, even as the pressure from Marcus and his group was likely to intensify. The real question was whether she could walk that fine line without either blowing her cover or allowing the situation to escalate beyond her control. The morning had established that she wasn't the easy target they had expected, but it had also painted a target on her back that would require careful navigation in the days to come. Sarah Chun had faced enemy forces in foreign countries, but dealing with the wounded pride and growing hostility of her fellow American cadets was proving to be a different kind of challenge entirely. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the weapons training range as Sergeant Williams led the cadets through the safety briefing that preceded every live-fire exercise. The familiar weight of an M4 carbine felt like coming home to Sarah, though she was careful to hold the weapon with the same cautious respect that the other recruits displayed. To them, this represented their first experience with serious military hardware. To her, it was just another tool she had mastered years ago under far more demanding circumstances. Marcus stood 3 positions down from Sarah on the firing line, his jaw set in determined concentration as he listened to the instructor's explanation of proper sight alignment and trigger control. The morning's humiliation on the obstacle course had lit a fire in him that burned with dangerous intensity. This was his chance to prove that the previous events had been flukes, that when it came to real military skills, size and strength still mattered. Today we'll be conducting marksmanship training at distances from 25 to 300 meters, Sergeant Williams announced, his voice carrying clearly across the range. This isn't about who can shoot the fastest or look the coolest. Military marksmanship is about precision, consistency, and the ability to deliver accurate fire when lives depend on it. The sergeant's eyes swept across the formation, pausing momentarily on Sarah before continuing. Each cadet will fire a series of qualification courses. Those who demonstrate exceptional ability may be selected for advanced training programs. Those who fail to meet standards will receive additional instruction until they improve or are recycled to basic training. Sarah nodded along with the others, though internally she was cataloging the differences between this controlled training environment and the chaotic reality of combat marksmanship. During her SEAL operations, she had engaged targets at distances exceeding 800 meters while under enemy fire, often from improvised shooting positions that would make these controlled range conditions seem like luxury accommodations. The weapons themselves were familiar friends. She had carried variants of the M4 carbine through the mountains of Afghanistan and the urban battlefields of Iraq, customizing each weapon to her specific requirements and preferences. The rifle in her hands now was standard military issue, lacking the specialized optics and modifications she was accustomed to, but still perfectly adequate for the task at hand. Chun, you're up first on lane 7. The range instructor called out, checking his roster clipboard. Sarah moved to her assigned position with practiced ease, though she was careful to demonstrate the same level of nervous energy that characterized the other recruits approaching their first serious marksmanship test. The target stood 25 meters downrange, a standard silhouette that represented the closest engagement distance for the day's training. For someone with Sarah's background, hitting center mass at this range was equivalent to throwing a ball into a basketball hoop from 3 feet away. The challenge would be to achieve good scores without demonstrating the kind of supernatural accuracy that would raise uncomfortable questions about her experience level. She assumed a proper shooting stance, automatically adjusting her body position for optimal recoil management and sight picture. The movements were so ingrained that she had to consciously think about appearing less fluid, less instinctive than her muscle memory demanded. The first shot broke cleanly, punching through the target's center mass with satisfying precision. Sarah cycled the bolt and fired again, placing her second round within inches of the first. Around her, other cadets were struggling with basic marksmanship fundamentals, their shots scattered across the target face or missing entirely. Marcus's shots, when his turn came, demonstrated decent natural ability hampered by poor technique. His physical strength allowed him to control the rifle's recoil easily, but his sight alignment was inconsistent and his trigger control needed significant improvement. After 10 rounds, his target showed a scattered pattern that covered most of the scoring area without achieving the tight grouping that indicated precision marksmanship. Not bad for a first attempt, the range instructor commented as he examined Marcus's target. Your shots are all on target, but we need to work on consistency. Marksmanship is like golf. It's not about power. It's about repeating the same perfect technique over and over again. When the instructor reached Sarah's target, his expression shifted from routine evaluation to genuine interest. Her 10 shots had created a group that could be covered by a playing card, all clustered in the high-scoring center of the target. It was the kind of shooting that typically required months of dedicated practice to achieve. Outstanding marksmanship, Chun, he said, though his tone carried a note of curiosity that made Sarah's internal alarms activate. Have you done competitive shooting before? This level of accuracy usually indicates significant prior experience. Sarah forced herself to look pleased but slightly surprised by her performance, as though she hadn't expected to shoot so well. I went hunting with my father a few times when I was younger, she replied, delivering another carefully crafted partial truth. Maybe some of that carried over to this. The explanation was technically accurate. She had indeed gone hunting as a child, though she omitted the fact that her father had been a retired Delta Force operator who had insisted on teaching her advanced marksmanship principles from an early age. Those early lessons had provided the foundation for the specialized training she had received later during her military career. Marcus overheard the exchange and felt his frustration reaching dangerous levels. First the obstacle course, now marksmanship. It seemed like every challenge was being dominated by the small woman he had dismissed as weak and inadequate. His worldview, built around the assumption that physical size and masculine aggression were the primary determinants of military success, was crumbling before his eyes. Beginner's luck, he muttered to Jake, though his voice lacked conviction. Deep down, he was beginning to suspect that there was more to Sarah Chun than met the eye, and that suspicion was feeding his anger rather than tempering it. The training progressed to longer ranges, where the challenges of wind compensation and bullet drop came into play. At 100 meters, many of the cadets began struggling significantly as their fundamental marksmanship flaws became magnified by distance. Marcus's shots, which had been merely scattered at 25 meters, now began missing the target entirely as his poor technique compounded with each additional meter. Sarah continued to perform with mechanical consistency, though she was forced to occasionally throw shots slightly off-center to avoid creating suspiciously perfect groups. Her training had included extensive work at much longer ranges, where she had learned to account for environmental factors that weren't even present on this controlled range. During one memorable mission in the mountains of Pakistan, she had successfully engaged enemy snipers at ranges exceeding 600 meters while lying prone in snow that had soaked through her camouflage. Compared to that experience, shooting at stationary targets on a clear day felt almost like cheating. All right, people, we're moving to 300 meters, Sergeant Williams announced as the range crews shifted targets to the distant marker line. This is where marksmanship becomes an art form. You'll need to account for bullet drop, wind drift, and the limits of your optics. Some of you may find this challenging. The understatement drew nervous laughter from several cadets who were already struggling at shorter ranges. Marcus stared downrange at the distant target, barely visible even through his rifle's iron sights. At this distance, precise shot placement would require skills he simply didn't possess, and the knowledge was eating at him like acid. Sarah approached the long-range portion with the same calm professionalism she had displayed throughout the day. 300 meters was well within the effective range of the M4 carbine, though it did require more attention to fundamental marksmanship principles than the closer distances. During her SEAL training, she had regularly engaged targets at twice this distance using similar weapon systems. Her first shot at the extended range was deliberately placed slightly off-center, creating the impression of someone adjusting to the new challenge. The second shot was closer to perfect, and by the third round she had established a pattern that suggested natural ability combined with quick learning rather than extensive prior experience. Marcus's attempt at the long-range targets was a disaster that left him visibly shaken. His shots scattered wildly around the target area, with several missing the scoring zones entirely. The combination of poor fundamentals and inadequate understanding of long-range shooting principles made success impossible at this distance. "Don't worry about it, Rodriguez," the range instructor said, trying to be encouraging as he examined the dismal target. "Long-range marksmanship is an advanced skill that takes time to develop. We'll work on your fundamentals and build up to these distances gradually." The consolation only made Marcus feel worse, particularly when contrasted with the instructor's praise for Sarah's performance. The woman he had expected to wash out of training was excelling at every challenge, while his own performance was becoming increasingly embarrassing. During the lunch break, the tension within the cadet formation reached a boiling point. Marcus sat with Jake, Tony, and several other cadets who shared his growing resentment towards Sarah's success. What had started as casual mockery was evolving into something much more dangerous, a coordinated effort to undermine and humiliate someone who threatened their sense of superiority. "There's no way she's just a regular recruit," Marcus said, keeping his voice low but allowing his anger to show clearly. "Nobody shoots like that without serious training. I think we're being set up somehow." Jake nodded grimly, his own frustration evident in his clenched jaw. "Maybe she's some kind of ringer brought in to make the rest of us look bad. Or maybe she's lying about her background. Either way, she's making us all look like amateurs." Tony, who had remained quiet during most of the morning's events, finally spoke up with the street wisdom he had developed growing up in Chicago's rougher neighborhoods. "I don't care what her deal is. Nobody makes me look stupid and gets away with it. If she wants to play games, we can play games too." The conversation was overheard by several other cadets who had also been struggling with the day's challenges. Sarah's excellence was making them all question their own abilities and prospects for success in the program. Rather than inspiring them to improve, her performance was generating resentment and a desire to bring her down to their level. Sarah sat alone at a nearby table, eating her meal in contemplative silence while mentally processing the morning's events. Her enhanced hearing, trained through years of surveillance operations, had picked up fragments of the conversation at Marcus's table. She was beginning to realize that her measured responses to their initial harassment might not be sufficient to defuse the growing hostility. The afternoon's training schedule included close-quarters combat instruction, an area where her advantages would be even more difficult to conceal. Hand-to-hand combat had been a crucial component of her SEAL training, and she had refined those skills through real-world application in environments where failure meant capture or death. The challenge would be finding a way to perform competently without revealing the lethal efficiency that characterized her true combat abilities. Too much restraint might invite further aggression from Marcus and his group, but too little could expose her cover and compromise her mission. As the cadets filed back into the training area after lunch, Sarah noticed the way Marcus and his supporters had positioned themselves. They were no longer content with verbal harassment and mockery. Their body language suggested they were preparing for more direct action. The afternoon's close-quarters combat training took place in a dedicated facility equipped with mats and protective gear. Sergeant Williams introduced the session with his usual emphasis on safety and proper technique, but Sarah could sense the underlying tension in the room like electricity before a thunderstorm. "Close-quarters combat is about more than just fighting," the sergeant explained to the assembled cadets. "It's about controlling space, reading opponents, and applying force precisely when and where it's needed. Size and strength can be advantages, but technique and timing often matter more." Marcus rolled his eyes at this last comment, clearly skeptical that anything could overcome his significant physical advantages. At 220 pounds of muscle, he was confident that he could dominate any opponent through pure force, regardless of their technical skills. The training began with basic defensive techniques designed to help smaller fighters survive encounters with larger opponents. Sarah participated with apparent interest, though the moves being demonstrated were elementary compared to the advanced combat systems she had mastered during her military training. When the sergeant called for sparring partners, Marcus immediately volunteered to work with Sarah. His eagerness was thinly disguised as helpful mentoring, but Sarah recognized the predatory gleam in his eyes. This was his opportunity to reassert dominance and put the upstart recruit back in what he considered her proper place. "I'll take it easy on you," Marcus said as they faced off on the mats, his tone suggesting false concern masking genuine malice. "We don't want anyone getting hurt during training." Sarah nodded politely, though internally she was calculating angles and assessing vulnerabilities with the automatic precision of someone trained to end fights quickly and efficiently. Marcus's size and reach were indeed advantages, but his stance revealed fundamental gaps in his training that could be exploited by someone with her background. The engagement began with Marcus attempting to use his size advantage to overwhelm her through aggressive grappling. He lunged forward, trying to wrap her up in a bear hug that would allow him to use his superior weight and strength to control the encounter. Sarah flowed away from his attack like water, using his own momentum against him while applying a subtle trip that sent him stumbling past her. To observers, it looked like Marcus had simply overcommit to his attack and lost his balance. Only Sarah knew how precisely she had manipulated his center of gravity to create that result. "Whoa there, big guy," she said with apparent good humor as Marcus caught himself before falling. "Maybe start a little slower until we get warmed up." The suggestion stung Marcus's pride and fueled his determination to prove his superiority. His second attack was more controlled but equally unsuccessful, as Sarah employed defensive techniques that turned his strength against him without appearing to do anything more than basic defensive movements. After several more failed attempts, Marcus was breathing heavily and growing visibly frustrated. His attacks were becoming sloppier as anger began to override his tactical thinking, a development that Sarah recognized as both dangerous and potentially useful for her purposes. "Let me show you something," Sarah said, seeming to take pity on his struggles. "Sometimes the key is not to fight force with force, but to redirect it." What followed was a demonstration that appeared to be helpful instruction, but was actually a carefully controlled display of her true capabilities. Sarah moved with fluid precision, showing Marcus how proper technique could neutralize size advantages while making it look like basic defensive principles rather than advanced combat skills. To the watching instructors and cadets, it appeared that Sarah was simply a natural athlete with good instincts and quick learning ability. They couldn't see the years of specialized training that allowed her to control every aspect of the engagement while making it look effortless and educational. Marcus, however, was beginning to sense that he was being played. His growing suspicion that Sarah was far more skilled than she appeared was confirmed by the ease with which she neutralized his attacks while providing what seemed like helpful coaching. "Thanks for the lesson," he said through gritted teeth as the sparring session ended. His tone was polite enough for public consumption, but his eyes promised that their conflict was far from over. The remainder of the afternoon proceeded with tactical movement exercises designed to teach cadets how to advance under fire and maintain unit cohesion during combat operations. These drills required coordination, communication, and the ability to think clearly under stress, skills that played more to Sarah's strengths than the raw physical challenges of the morning. Marcus continued to struggle with the more cerebral aspects of military training. His aggressive nature, which served him well in direct physical confrontations, worked against him when precision and teamwork were required. Sarah, meanwhile, demonstrated the kind of tactical awareness that suggested extensive experience with real combat operations. As the day's training concluded and the cadets prepared to return to their barracks, Sarah found herself surrounded by Marcus and his core group of supporters. They had positioned themselves to block her path in a way that appeared casual but was clearly intended to intimidate. "We need to talk," Marcus said, his voice carrying a tone that suggested this wasn't a request. The other cadets in the area began to notice the confrontation, though none seemed inclined to intervene on behalf of someone they barely knew. Sarah assessed the situation with tactical precision, noting escape routes, potential weapons, and the positioning of both hostiles and neutrals in the area. This was the kind of scenario she had trained for extensively, being outnumbered by hostiles in an environment where she couldn't rely on backup or superior firepower. "Sure," she replied calmly, her relaxed posture concealing her readiness to respond to any sudden movements. "What's on your mind?" Marcus stepped closer, using his height advantage to loom over her in a display of physical intimidation that had probably worked well for him in civilian life. "My mind is wondering how a little girl who claims to be new to military training can outperform everyone else on every single challenge we've faced today." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, drawing the attention of nearby cadets who sensed drama unfolding. Sarah realized that her response to this moment would likely determine whether the situation escalated into open conflict or could be defused through careful management. "I've always been athletic," she replied with the same mild tone she had maintained throughout the day. "Maybe I just have good instincts for this kind of training." Jake moved to flank her from the left, while Tony positioned himself to her right, creating a semicircle that limited her movement options. The coordination suggested they had planned this confrontation rather than allowing it to develop spontaneously. "Good instincts." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Lady, you're shooting like Annie Oakley and fighting like Bruce Lee, and you want us to believe it's just natural talent? Do you think we're stupid?" The question was loaded with implications that went beyond simple curiosity about her background. Sarah recognized that Marcus was testing her response, looking for confirmation of his suspicions while simultaneously establishing dominance through verbal aggression. She also noticed that several other cadets had gathered to watch the confrontation, their expressions revealing a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. Some seemed to be hoping for a dramatic conclusion to the tension that had been building throughout the day, while others appeared uncomfortable with the aggressive nature of the challenge. "I think you're frustrated because today didn't go the way you expected," Sarah replied, her tone remaining steady despite the escalating hostility. "But taking it out on me isn't going to change your scores or make you feel better about your performance." The response was perfectly calibrated to deflate Marcus's aggression while avoiding any statements that could be interpreted as admissions of deception. It also shifted the focus from her suspicious skills to his emotional reaction, putting him on the defensive while maintaining her position as the reasonable party in the conflict. Marcus's face reddened as he realized she had turned his own tactics against him. The suggestion that his confrontation was motivated by wounded pride rather than legitimate suspicion struck close enough to the truth to sting, while her calm demeanor made him appear increasingly irrational by comparison. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice carrying a promise of future conflict that made several nearby cadets step back nervously. "Whatever game you're playing, whoever you really are, I'm going to figure it out." With that threat delivered, Marcus and his supporters dispersed, leaving Sarah standing alone among the remaining cadets who had witnessed the confrontation. She could feel their speculative gazes as they tried to process what they had seen and heard, wondering whether there was truth to Marcus's accusations. As she walked back to the barracks, Sarah reflected on the complexity of her current situation. The morning's training had established that she couldn't be dismissed as weak or incompetent, but it had also painted a target on her back that was growing larger with each passing hour. Her mission at Fort Harrison required her to maintain her cover while gathering intelligence on potential security vulnerabilities in the training program. The harassment from Marcus and his group was becoming a significant complication that threatened to derail her objectives if it escalated further. The evening would bring new challenges as the cadets settled into barracks life, and the informal social hierarchy continued to develop. Sarah knew that her conflicts with Marcus were far from over, and that the next phase would likely involve more sophisticated attempts to undermine her position or expose her true background. She had faced hostile forces in foreign countries and survived capture by enemy agents, but dealing with the wounded pride and growing suspicion of her fellow American cadets was proving to require a different kind of strategic thinking. The skills that had kept her alive in combat zones would need to be adapted for this more subtle but equally dangerous social battlefield. The barracks settled into an uneasy quiet as evening fell over Fort Harrison, but beneath the surface calm, tensions continued to simmer like water approaching a boil. Sarah lay on her narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling while listening to the hushed conversations taking place around her. Her enhanced hearing, developed through years of surveillance training, picked up fragments of discussion that confirmed her suspicions about the growing conspiracy against her. 3 bunks away, Marcus was holding court with his usual supporters, their voices deliberately low but not quite quiet enough to escape Sarah's trained senses. The day's humiliations had only hardened his resolve to expose what he perceived as her deception, and he was actively recruiting allies for whatever action he was planning. "There's no way she's legitimate," Marcus whispered to Jake, his voice carrying the conviction of someone whose worldview depended on being right. "I've been around military training my whole life. My dad was Special Forces, my uncle was a Marine. Nobody develops those kinds of skills without serious background." Jake nodded grimly in the darkness, his own frustration evident in his tense posture. "So what do we do about it? We can't just accuse her of lying without proof." The instructors seemed to buy her story about being naturally athletic. Tony's voice carried a harder edge, reflecting his street-smart approach to problem-solving. "We don't need to prove anything to the instructors. We just need to put her in a situation where she has to show her true colors, create some pressure, and see how she really reacts." Sarah processed this intelligence while maintaining the steady breathing pattern of someone apparently asleep. The planning session confirmed that Marcus and his group were moving beyond harassment toward more direct action. Their growing sophistication suggested that the situation was likely to escalate significantly in the coming days. Her mission briefing had warned about the possibility of encountering hostile elements within the training program, though the analysts had assumed those threats would come from foreign agents or domestic extremists rather than disgruntled cadets. The irony wasn't lost on her that her greatest challenge so far involved managing the wounded pride of fellow Americans rather than enemy operatives. Around midnight, long after the barracks had officially settled down for the night, Sarah heard the subtle sounds of movement that indicated someone was preparing to leave the building. Years of light sleeping in hostile environments had trained her to wake instantly at any unusual sound, and the pattern of footsteps suggested deliberate stealth rather than a routine trip to the bathroom. Through carefully slitted eyes, she watched Marcus slip out of his bunk and begin moving toward the exit with the kind of exaggerated caution that marked him as an amateur at covert movement. His technique was clumsy compared to the standards she was accustomed to, but adequate for moving through a building full of sleeping cadets. Sarah waited several minutes after Marcus disappeared before beginning her own preparations to follow. Her nighttime surveillance kit consisted of items that appeared innocuous if discovered but provided significant advantages for covert observation. A small LED flashlight with red filter, lock-picking tools disguised as hair accessories, and a compact camera capable of infrared photography. Moving through the darkened barracks required skills she had perfected during infiltration missions in hostile territory. Every footstep was carefully placed to avoid creaking floorboards, every breath controlled to minimize sound signature, every movement fluid enough to avoid creating suspicious shadows if someone else happened to be awake. The exit Marcus had used led to a side entrance that bypassed the main security checkpoint, suggesting he was familiar with the building's layout and routine patrol patterns. Sarah followed his route while maintaining sufficient distance to avoid detection, using shadows and architectural features to mask her presence. Outside, the military base took on a different character in the darkness. Security lighting created pools of visibility separated by deep shadows that provided concealment for anyone with the skills to exploit them. Sarah moved through this landscape like a ghost, her SEAL training allowing her to navigate the terrain while remaining virtually invisible to casual observation. Marcus's destination proved to be a storage building located near the vehicle maintenance area, a location isolated enough to avoid casual discovery, but accessible through routes that wouldn't immediately trigger security protocols. Sarah positioned herself in concealment where she could observe his activities without being detected. What she saw made her reassess the threat level posed by Marcus and his group. Rather than engaging in simple vandalism or amateur harassment, he was methodically searching through administrative files that had been stored in the building. His technique was crude but systematic, suggesting he had received some basic training in intelligence gathering. Through her compact camera's telephoto lens, Sarah documented Marcus's activities while trying to determine what information he was seeking. The files appeared to be personnel records and training documents, exactly the kind of material that could contain details about her fabricated background and cover identity. Her cover story had been carefully constructed by intelligence professionals, but it wasn't perfect. Under sufficient scrutiny from someone with access to the right databases, inconsistencies might become apparent that could compromise her mission or reveal her true identity. Marcus's amateur investigation represented a genuine threat that needed to be managed carefully. After nearly an hour of searching, Marcus found what he was looking for, a file folder that made him sit back with satisfaction visible even in the dim lighting. Sarah's enhanced optics allowed her to see him photographing documents with his cell phone, though she couldn't make out the specific content from her position. The intelligence gathering session ended with Marcus carefully replacing the files and erasing evidence of his intrusion. His technique was good enough to fool casual inspection, but wouldn't survive professional security review. Sarah made mental notes about his methods and timing, information that might prove useful if the situation continued to escalate. Marcus's return route to the barracks followed a different path, suggesting he had planned multiple approaches to avoid establishing patterns that might be detected by security personnel. Sarah paralleled his movement while maintaining concealment, documenting his route for future reference. Back in the barracks, both of them returned to their bunks with the practiced stealth of people accustomed to covert movement. Sarah resumed her position and breathing pattern quickly enough to maintain her cover, while Marcus spent several minutes settling down as adrenaline from his nighttime adventure slowly faded. The next morning brought advanced weapons training scheduled to include explosives familiarization and tactical demolition techniques. Sarah approached this training with particular caution, as her extensive background with explosives would be extremely difficult to conceal if the instruction became detailed or hands-on. During her SEAL operations, she had become proficient with a wide range of explosive devices, from simple breaching charges to complex timed demolitions used for infrastructure sabotage. Her knowledge encompassed not only the technical aspects of explosives handling, but also the tactical applications that made demolitions an effective force multiplier in combat operations. The morning briefing took place in a specialized facility designed for explosive materials training, complete with protective barriers and emergency procedures that would have been familiar to her from similar facilities around the world. Sergeant Williams introduced the session with his usual emphasis on safety, but the potential lethality of the training materials gave his warnings additional gravity. Explosives are tools that demand absolute respect, he announced to the assembled cadets. A moment of carelessness or overconfidence can result in catastrophic consequences that extend far beyond the person making the mistake. Today we'll cover basic principles and safety procedures, with hands-on demonstration limited to inert training materials. Sarah relaxed slightly, as it became clear that the session would focus on theoretical knowledge rather than practical application. Her extensive experience would be less difficult to conceal if she wasn't required to demonstrate actual technique with live explosives. Marcus, still energized by his successful intelligence-gathering operation, approached the explosives training with renewed confidence. Whatever he had discovered in those files had reinforced his suspicions about Sarah, and he was eager to find new ways to test and expose her supposed deceptions. The instructor began with fundamental concepts that covered explosive types, initiation methods, and basic safety protocols. Sarah listened with apparent attention while internally comparing the simplified instruction to the advanced demolitions training she had received during her military career. When the lesson progressed to hands-on examination of inert training devices, Sarah found herself in a delicate position. The devices were familiar to her from actual combat usage, but she needed to display the appropriate level of caution and unfamiliarity that would be expected from a genuine new recruit. "Chun, let's see how you handle the basic setup procedure," the instructor called, gesturing for her to approach the demonstration table where various training explosives were displayed. Sarah approached with the deliberate caution of someone handling potentially dangerous materials for the first time. Her movements were careful and methodical, following the instructor's guidance while suppressing the automatic efficiency that years of experience had ingrained in her muscle memory. The device in question was a training version of a standard breaching charge, designed to teach basic assembly and placement techniques without the risks associated with live explosives. To Sarah, it was a familiar tool she could have assembled blindfolded, but she forced herself to work slowly and ask appropriate questions about each step. "Like this?" she asked, positioning the simulated explosive with careful attention to the instructor's guidance, while deliberately avoiding the optimizations she would normally employ. "Excellent technique," the instructor replied, clearly impressed by her careful approach and attention to safety protocols. "You're showing exactly the kind of methodical thinking that's essential when working with explosives." Marcus watched her demonstration with growing suspicion, noting details that didn't quite fit his expectations for someone supposedly new to military training. Her hand positioning, though deliberately slow, showed a comfort with the materials that suggested prior experience. Her questions, while appropriate for a beginner, revealed an understanding of underlying principles that typically required extensive education to develop. When Marcus's turn came to handle the training materials, his performance was notably less impressive. Despite his size and apparent confidence, he struggled with the fine motor control required for precise assembly work. His technique was rushed and sloppy, requiring multiple corrections from the instructor. "Take your time, Rodriguez," the instructor advised as Marcus fumbled with a connection that should have been straightforward. "Explosives work doesn't reward impatience. Slow and steady prevents accidents." The criticism stung Marcus's pride and added another layer to his growing resentment towards Sarah. Every training exercise seemed designed to highlight her competence while exposing his own limitations, a pattern that was becoming increasingly difficult for him to accept. The afternoon schedule included navigation training using both map and compass techniques and modern GPS systems. This was another area where Sarah's extensive field experience provided significant advantages that would be challenging to conceal, as her years of operating in hostile territory had made land navigation as natural as breathing. The training took place in a wooded area adjacent to the main base, where cadets would be required to locate specific checkpoints using only basic navigation tools and techniques. Sarah approached this challenge with the same careful balance she had maintained throughout her training, knowing that her performance needed to be good enough to avoid suspicion while not being so exceptional as to reveal her true capabilities. Marcus saw the navigation exercise as another opportunity to test his theories about Sarah's background. He had convinced Jake and Tony to participate in an informal competition to see who could complete the course fastest, with the unstated goal of putting additional pressure on Sarah to reveal her true skill level. Let's make this interesting, Marcus announced as the cadets prepared their equipment. First one back to the starting point with all checkpoints verified wins bragging rights for the week. The challenge was exactly the kind of peer pressure that could force someone to reveal capabilities they were trying to conceal. Sarah recognized the trap, but also understood that declining to participate would be suspicious in its own way. She needed to find a middle path that allowed her to compete without dominating. The course consisted of 5 checkpoints scattered throughout several square miles of mixed terrain, each requiring precise navigation to locate and verify. For someone with Sarah's background, the challenge was elementary. She had conducted similar exercises in hostile territory while carrying full combat loads and avoiding enemy patrols. Marcus set off immediately with characteristic aggression, apparently hoping to overwhelm the technical aspects of navigation through pure physical effort. His approach demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of land navigation principles, but his determination was undeniable. Sarah began her route with deliberate methodical planning, studying the map and terrain features while calculating optimal approaches to each checkpoint. Her technique was textbook perfect, but she deliberately slowed her pace to avoid completing the course suspiciously quickly. The first checkpoint was located near a stream that required careful route selection to avoid difficult terrain. Sarah's approach took her through terrain that provided concealment while maintaining efficient progress, a consideration that would only occur to someone with actual field experience. Marcus, meanwhile, had chosen a more direct route that led him through difficult undergrowth and across obstacles that could have been easily avoided with better planning. His progress was slow and frustrating, requiring frequent stops to reorient himself as his original bearing proved increasingly inaccurate. The second checkpoint tested map reading skills more directly, requiring cadets to identify a specific terrain feature using only topographical information and compass bearings. Sarah located it with mechanical precision, though she deliberately took extra time studying her map to create the impression of careful calculation rather than instant recognition. As the afternoon progressed, it became clear that Marcus's approach to the navigation challenge was failing badly. His aggressive pace had led him increasingly off course, and his frustration was causing him to make additional errors that compounded his problems. By the fourth checkpoint, he was badly behind schedule and growing desperate to salvage his performance. Sarah, meanwhile, was maintaining steady progress that kept her competitive without being exceptional. Her route selection was efficient, but not optimal, and her pace was brisk, but not suspiciously fast. To casual observation, she appeared to be a naturally capable cadet who was performing well within normal parameters. The final checkpoint required night vision techniques as the exercise extended into the early evening hours. This was another area where Sarah's military background provided significant advantages, as she had spent countless hours operating in low-light conditions during her SEAL missions. Using red-filtered light to preserve night vision while reading maps and maintaining navigation accuracy was second nature to her, but she forced herself to work more slowly and carefully than her training demanded. The other cadets struggled visibly with the transition to night operations, their movements becoming more hesitant and error-prone as darkness complicated their navigation efforts. Marcus's attempts at night navigation were particularly disastrous, as his poor map reading skills became even more pronounced under limited visibility conditions. He missed the final checkpoint entirely, requiring a search team to locate him when he failed to return to the starting point within the allocated time frame. When all the cadets had finally completed the exercise or been located by search teams, the results confirmed the pattern that had been developing throughout the training program. Sarah had finished with a respectable performance that demonstrated competence without raising suspicions about exceptional training. Marcus had performed poorly enough to require remedial instruction. Good work overall, Sergeant Williams announced as the cadets assembled for debriefing. Navigation is a perishable skill that requires constant practice to maintain. Those who struggled today shouldn't be discouraged. We'll continue working on these techniques until everyone achieves proficiency. Marcus's jaw tightened as he processed another failure in front of his peers. The navigation exercise had been intended to expose Sarah's supposed deceptions, but instead it had highlighted his own inadequacies while she continued to excel through what appeared to be natural ability and good preparation. During the evening meal, the atmosphere in the dining facility reflected the growing polarization within the cadet formation. Marcus and his core supporters sat together. Their conversation focused on theories and plans for exposing Sarah's presumed deception. Other cadets were beginning to choose sides, either attracted to Marcus's aggressive leadership or put off by his increasingly obsessive behavior. Sarah sat alone, as had become her pattern, but she was far from isolated. Her enhanced hearing allowed her to monitor multiple conversations simultaneously, gathering intelligence about the developing social dynamics and potential threats to her mission security. The conversation at Marcus's table had evolved beyond simple suspicion into active planning for more direct action. Tony was advocating for confrontational approaches that could force Sarah to reveal her true capabilities, while Jake favored more subtle intelligence gathering to build a case against her. "We need to create a situation where she can't hold back," Tony argued, his voice carrying the aggressive confidence he had developed on the streets of Chicago. "Put her in real danger, and see how she really reacts." Marcus nodded grimly, his earlier frustrations crystallizing into determination for decisive action. "Tomorrow's combat exercise might give us the opportunity we need. If she's really some kind of special operations plant, she won't be able to maintain her act when things get serious." The reference to tomorrow's training schedule caught Sarah's attention immediately. She was aware that the program included increasingly realistic combat scenarios designed to test cadets under stress, but she hadn't received specific details about what those exercises would involve. If Marcus and his group were planning to use the combat training as cover for more aggressive action against her, she would need to prepare accordingly. The situation was escalating beyond simple harassment towards something that could compromise her mission or put her in actual physical danger. As the evening wore on and the cadets prepared for sleep, Sarah reflected on the complexity of her current situation. Her mission required her to maintain cover while gathering intelligence about potential security vulnerabilities in the training program. But the growing hostility from Marcus and his supporters was creating a secondary threat that demanded increasing attention and resources. The skills that had kept her alive during covert operations in hostile countries were proving essential for navigating the social battlefield of military training, but the rules of engagement were different here. She couldn't simply eliminate threats or extract herself from dangerous situations. She had to manage them carefully while maintaining her cover identity. Tomorrow's combat exercise would likely represent a turning point in her conflict with Marcus and his group. Whatever action they were planning would probably come during the confusion and stress of realistic training, when accidents could be explained as the unfortunate result of inexperience or poor judgment. Sarah began her own planning process, considering contingencies and responses for various scenarios while maintaining the appearance of a cadet preparing for sleep. Her years of experience had taught her that the key to survival was preparation and adaptability, qualities that would be essential for whatever challenges the next day would bring. The barracks settled into darkness around her, but beneath the surface calm, multiple parties were making preparations for what was likely to be a decisive confrontation. The stage was set for a conflict that would test Sarah's ability to maintain her cover while protecting herself from increasingly desperate and potentially dangerous adversaries. Dawn broke gray and overcast over Fort Harrison, the kind of weather that seemed to mirror the tension that had been building between Sarah and Marcus's group. The morning's combat exercise was scheduled to take place in a realistic urban warfare training facility designed to simulate the complexities of modern battlefield conditions. Sarah understood that this would likely be when Marcus attempted whatever action he had been planning. The training facility itself was an impressive piece of military engineering, a mock urban environment complete with multi-story buildings, narrow alleyways, and hidden observation points that could accommodate elaborate scenario-based training. Sarah had operated in similar real environments during her SEAL missions, but she was careful to approach the facility with the appropriate mixture of nervousness and excitement that would be expected from a genuine new recruit. Sergeant Williams gathered the cadets for their pre-exercise briefing in a staging area adjacent to the training facility. His expression was more serious than usual, reflecting the increased complexity and potential danger of the day's training objectives. "Today's exercise will test everything you've learned about tactics, marksmanship, and teamwork under conditions that approximate real combat," he announced to the assembled formation. "You'll be using simulated ammunition and laser training systems, but the scenarios are designed to create genuine stress and confusion." Sarah noted the mention of simulated ammunition and training systems with interest. The use of non-lethal training aids would reduce the risk of actual casualties, but It also meant that her opponents might feel emboldened to take actions they wouldn't consider if live ammunition were involved. The scenario involves clearing a hostile urban area where enemy forces are holding civilian hostages, Williams continued. Your mission is to neutralize the opposition while minimizing civilian casualties and maintaining unit cohesion. You'll be divided into 4-person teams with rotating leadership responsibilities. The team assignments were announced with military efficiency, and Sarah found herself grouped with Marcus, Jake, and Tony, a combination that was either coincidental or deliberately arranged by instructors who wanted to see how the developing conflict would resolve itself under pressure. Marcus's expression when the team assignments were announced confirmed Sarah's suspicion that this arrangement suited his plans perfectly. Whatever action he was contemplating would be much easier to execute when she was isolated with his core supporters in a chaotic training environment. The team received their equipment loadout, modified M4 carbines equipped with laser training systems, tactical radios, and protective gear designed to register hits from the simulated weapons. Sarah checked her equipment with the same methodical precision she had displayed throughout her training, though internally she was assessing the gear's capabilities and limitations from a tactical perspective. The laser training systems were sophisticated enough to provide realistic feedback about hits and misses, but they also meant that superior marksmanship skills would be immediately apparent to anyone observing the exercise. Sarah would need to carefully manage her performance to avoid revealing the exceptional accuracy that characterized her real combat capabilities. All right, Red Team, Marcus announced as they moved toward their assigned starting position. His assumption of leadership was automatic and unchallenged, fitting the personality type that had made him dominant throughout their training. Let's go over our approach to the target building. The building in question was a 3-story structure designed to simulate a typical urban apartment complex, complete with multiple entry points, stairwells, and rooms that could conceal hostile forces or civilian hostages. Sarah studied the structure with tactical eyes, automatically identifying optimal approaches, potential ambush sites, and evacuation routes. Marcus's tactical planning was aggressive but flawed, relying too heavily on direct assault techniques that would work against inexperienced opponents, but would be catastrophic against professional opposition. His approach demonstrated the kind of thinking that got soldiers killed in real combat situations. We'll breach the main entrance and clear floor by floor, Marcus explained, sketching his plan on a piece of paper. Jake takes point, Tony covers our rear, Chun provides support fire from designated positions. Sarah recognized that her assigned role would isolate her from the rest of the team during critical phases of the exercise, creating opportunities for accidents that could be attributed to the confusion of combat training. Marcus was positioning her where she would be most vulnerable while maintaining plausible deniability for whatever he was planning. That approach leaves us exposed to flanking attacks from the side entrances, Sarah observed, pointing out tactical flaws in the plan. We should consider a more systematic clearance pattern that secures our flanks as we advance. Her tactical suggestions were sound and demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that impressed the observing instructors, but they also frustrated Marcus, who saw her competence as another challenge to his authority and credibility. We don't have time for complicated tactics, Marcus replied dismissively. This is about speed and aggression. Hit them hard before they can organize effective resistance. The exchange highlighted the fundamental difference between Marcus's aggressive approach and Sarah's professional tactical training. His methods might work in training scenarios, but they would be suicidal against experienced opposition in real combat conditions. As the exercise began, the team moved toward their target building with Marcus in overall command and Jake taking the point position as planned. Sarah maintained her assigned support role while internally tracking the developing tactical situation and preparing for whatever action Marcus was contemplating. The first contact came at the building's main entrance, where opposing force personnel had established a defensive position designed to test the attacking team's coordination and tactical skills. The laser training systems created realistic sound effects that added to the stress and confusion of the simulated combat environment. Marcus's aggressive approach initially showed promise as the team overwhelmed the entrance defenders through superior firepower and coordinated movement. His leadership was decisive and confident, drawing grudging respect from Sarah despite her reservations about his tactical methods. The problems began when they entered the building and encountered the complex, three-dimensional battlefield that urban combat represented. Marcus's plan, which had seemed reasonable on paper, quickly broke down as unexpected obstacles and defensive positions disrupted their advance. Jake, leading the point element, became separated from the team when he pursued retreating opponents down a corridor that led to a dead-end ambush site. His tactical radio failed during the engagement, leaving him isolated and unable to coordinate with the rest of the team. Tony, assigned to rear security, found himself engaged with opposing forces who had infiltrated behind their advance, creating a two-front battle that Marcus's simple plan hadn't anticipated. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly as the team lost cohesion and became scattered throughout the building. Sarah recognized that the exercise was becoming a tactical disaster that could result in mission failure and potentially dangerous situations for the isolated team members. Her professional training demanded that she take action to restore order and complete the mission objectives, but doing so would require revealing capabilities that could compromise her cover. Marcus, meanwhile, was struggling to maintain control of the deteriorating situation. His radio communications were becoming increasingly frantic as he tried to coordinate scattered team members while engaging multiple hostile positions. The stress was exposing weaknesses in his leadership abilities that had been concealed during simpler training exercises. "Chun, where are you?" Marcus's voice crackled over the radio as he attempted to locate his missing team members. "I need you to provide covering fire for Jake's position." Sarah was positioned in a stairwell that provided excellent observation of the building's layout and enemy positions, but her assigned support role kept her from taking direct action to resolve the tactical problems. She could see solutions to the team's difficulties, but implementing them would require abandoning her role as a passive support element. The moment of crisis came when Jake's position was overrun by opposing forces, and his simulated casualties indicated that he had been killed during the engagement. Tony was also under heavy pressure and reporting that his ammunition was running low, while Marcus was pinned down by effective enemy fire from multiple directions. Sarah made the tactical decision to abandon her assigned role and take direct action to prevent the total collapse of her team's mission. Her years of SEAL training took over as she moved through the building with fluid efficiency, engaging targets with precision that demonstrated exceptional skill and experience. Her first action was to relieve pressure on Tony's position by flanking the enemy forces that had him pinned down. Sarah moved through the building using advanced tactical techniques that allowed her to approach hostile positions from unexpected directions, engaging them with accuracy that quickly neutralized the threat. The laser training system registered her shots as perfect center mass hits that would have been immediately lethal in real combat conditions. Her movement techniques and target engagement demonstrated a level of professional competence that was impossible to conceal or explain as natural talent. Marcus witnessed Sarah's tactical display through his position's observation windows, and what he saw confirmed his worst suspicions about her true identity and background. No civilian recruit, regardless of natural ability, could demonstrate that level of tactical sophistication and marksmanship accuracy. Sarah's second action was to establish a flanking position that allowed her to relieve Marcus's pinned-down team element. Her approach route took her through areas of the building that should have been impossible to navigate without detailed knowledge of urban combat techniques, and her engagement of enemy positions showed tactical awareness that indicated extensive training and experience. The exercise concluded with Sarah having single-handedly rescued her scattered team members and completed the primary mission objectives through a display of tactical excellence that left no doubt about her true capabilities. Her performance was so far above the expected level for a new recruit that it demanded explanation. Sergeant Williams and the other observing instructors approached the team's position with expressions that combined professional admiration for Sarah's tactical skills with obvious questions about her background and training. The exercise had revealed capabilities that couldn't be explained by her official records or cover story. "Outstanding tactical performance, Chun," Williams said as the team assembled for debriefing. His tone was carefully neutral, but his eyes showed the sharp interest of someone who recognized professional-level skills when he saw them. "Where did you develop that level of tactical awareness?" Sarah faced the critical moment she had been trying to avoid throughout her training. Her performance during the combat exercise had blown her cover completely, making it impossible to maintain the pretense of being an inexperienced recruit. The question was how to respond without compromising her mission or revealing classified information. Marcus stood nearby with an expression of grim satisfaction, finally having the proof he needed to support his accusations about her deception. His suspicions had been vindicated, but He was also beginning to realize that Sarah represented a far more serious challenge than he had initially understood. "I had some prior training before joining the program," Sarah replied, choosing her words carefully to provide truthful information without revealing specifics. "I wanted to test myself against military standards to see if this was the right career path for me." The explanation was another skillfully crafted partial truth that acknowledged her capabilities without providing details that could compromise operational security. It suggested that she had civilian training that exceeded normal expectations without claiming military experience that could be verified through official channels. Williams studied her with the experienced eye of someone who had seen thousands of recruits over his military career. "What kind of prior training are we talking about?" "Those were professional-level tactics and marksmanship skills." The direct question forced Sarah to walk an even finer line between truth and necessary deception. She needed to provide an explanation that satisfied immediate curiosity without revealing information that could compromise her mission or expose her true identity. "I participated in competitive shooting and tactical training courses offered by civilian contractors," she replied, maintaining steady eye contact while delivering another carefully constructed explanation. "Some of the instructors were former military personnel who taught advanced techniques." This explanation had the advantage of being completely plausible while avoiding specifics that could be easily verified. The civilian tactical training industry did indeed include former military personnel who taught advanced skills to paying customers, providing a cover story that would withstand casual investigation. Marcus's expression showed that he wasn't satisfied with Sarah's explanation, but he also recognized that her performance during the exercise had elevated the situation beyond simple cadet conflicts. Whatever her true background, she had demonstrated capabilities that suggested serious training and experience that went far beyond civilian hobby courses. Jake and Tony, who had been rescued by Sarah's intervention during the exercise, found themselves in the awkward position of owing their simulated lives to someone they had been actively working against. The tactical situation had reversed their relationship dynamics in ways that would be difficult to ignore going forward. The debriefing session continued with detailed analysis of the team's performance, but the focus inevitably centered on Sarah's exceptional display of tactical skills. The instructor's questions became increasingly specific and professional, clearly attempting to understand the scope and source of her training. Sarah navigated the questioning with the same careful balance she had maintained throughout her time at Fort Harrison, providing enough information to satisfy immediate curiosity while protecting classified details that could compromise her mission. Her responses demonstrated respect for operational security while acknowledging the reality that her cover had been blown. As the debriefing concluded,